She brought her camera. It was their first trip together. She wanted to capture every moment. The camera was never found. He took it with him. A souvenir. Proof that he had been there, on that ferry, with that couple, on the last night of their lives. And for 31 years, he kept living. Working. Driving his truck through the same streets where he had taken two people's lives in one night and scattered their bodies 60 miles apart. Until a woman who had never heard their names uploaded her DNA to the internet to build a family tree. And an analyst sitting at a computer did in 2 hours what 3 decades of investigation could not. There is a detail at the end of this story that I have not told you yet. A detail about what the killer did to one of the bodies that tells you exactly what kind of mind you are dealing with. Stay with me. This is the story of Jay Cook, 20 years old, and Tanya van Cuylenborg, 18 years old, a young couple from Saanich, British Columbia who boarded a ferry from Victoria on the evening of November 18, 1987 to run a simple errand. Pick up heater parts. Sleep one night in the van. Drive home the next morning. Neither of them ever made it home. Their bodies were found 6 days apart, 60 miles apart, killed in 2 completely different ways by the same hands. The man who did it left behind a fingerprint, a DNA profile, and a stolen camera, and then vanished back into his ordinary life as if nothing had happened. More than 200 leads. 2 serial killers investigated and cleared. 23 years of one detective's career consumed by a single case. And a DNA profile called Individual A that sat in an evidence file with no name attached to it for 3 decades. In this video, we are going to go through every layer of this story, the night of the ferry and what happened on those Seattle streets, what the killer did to Tanya and what he did to Jay, and why those 2 methods of killing tell us something deeply disturbing about the mind behind them, the 31-year cold case and every dead end, the stranger who accidentally cracked it open, the trial that made legal history, and the ruling that almost took everything away from the families before the Supreme Court stepped in. Watch until the very end. Because what the killer left on Jay Cook's body, one deliberate, cruel, symbolic act, is the detail that reveals exactly who he is. Subscribe right now and hit the bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And join our community, the link is in the description box below. Saanich, British Columbia, November 1987. Picture exactly what it was. A quiet residential town on the southern tip of Vancouver Island, the kind of place where families knew each other, where the rhythm of daily life was slow and familiar and safe. Tanya van Cuylenborg was 18 years old. She had just finished high school. The whole world was still in that beautiful uncertain space between what school had been and what adult life was going to become. She was figuring out her future. She was experiencing first love. She was carrying a Minolta X700 camera because she wanted to photograph their first real trip together. Her father William van Cuylenborg later said he felt Tanya and Jay were a great match. That he wasn't worried at all about letting them go together. That was the level of trust parents only extend to someone they know their child is completely safe with. Remember that. He wasn't worried at all. Jay Cook was 20 years old. The only son in the Cook family. His mother Leona believed Tanya was something very special to him. 6 months into their relationship, they were already the kind of couple that both families had simply accepted as a unit. The trip started from the most ordinary reason imaginable. Jay's father needed heater parts from Gensco Heating in Seattle. Jay volunteered to go pick them up. Simple. Practical. The kind of errand sons do for their fathers without a second thought. But Tanya and Jay decided to turn it into something more. One night away together. Just the 2 of them. Sleep in the Cook family's old van, pick up the parts in the morning, drive home, and come back with photographs from their first real trip together. That was the plan. Simple. Ordinary. Safe. On the evening of November 18, 1987, Jay and Tanya drove to the ferry terminal in Sydney, British Columbia, and boarded the first crossing to Port Angeles. From there they transferred to a second ferry, Bremerton to Seattle, departing at 10:16 in the evening. The ferry docked in Seattle at approximately 11:30 p.m. From that moment, no one knew where they went. No phone calls home that night. No calls the next morning. When Gensko Heating opened their doors the following day, no one was waiting to pick up the heater parts. This was not normal. Jay and Tanya were reliable. They were the kind of young people who checked in. Who called when they said they would call. Who did not simply vanish without telling anyone. On the evening of November 19th, when the couple should have been home since that afternoon, the phones in both the Cook household and the Van Cuylenborg household rang with calls going out, not coming in. Both families reported them missing to police that same night. But Jay and Tanya were no longer in Canada. They were somewhere in Washington state, in a country where neither family had connections, in cities they didn't know, in a situation no one could yet define. The two families in Saanich waited. Not knowing that the answer, when it came, would not be any answer they had been praying for. November 24, 1987. 6 days after the ferry left Victoria. A passerby on a rural road near Alger, in Skagit County, Washington, saw something at the edge of the road that no one should ever have to see. Tanya Van Cuylenborg's body was lying in a ditch beside the road under a steep embankment. She had been dumped there. Discarded. She had been raped. She had been shot in the back of the head. Her hands were bound behind her back with plastic zip ties. She was 18 years old. She had just graduated high school. She had brought her camera because she wanted to photograph her first trip with Jay. And she lay in that roadside ditch, alone, for 6 days before anyone found her. That same day, Tanya's wallet and her keys were found discarded near the Greyhound bus station in Bellingham, a few miles to the north. The Cook family's van was found parked in a lot in downtown Bellingham, a few blocks from the station. Inside the van, the killer had left things behind. Zip ties of the same type used to bind Tanya's hands. Plastic gloves. Receipts, including the Bremerton-Seattle ferry ticket confirming the couple had made that crossing on the night of November 18th. And one more thing. Tanya's black pants. The ones she had been wearing the night she was murdered. Left inside the van by a man who did not yet know that those pants would become the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case 31 years later. But Tanya's Minolta X700 camera, the one she had brought to document their first trip together, was not in the van. It was not at the scene. It was not found anywhere. He took it with him. And it was never recovered. And Jay was still missing. The Cook family was still holding on. Still telling themselves that maybe, just maybe, Jay was still alive somewhere. That there was still a version of this that didn't end the way everything else had. 2 days later, that hope was gone. November 26, 1987. Jay Cook's body was discovered under a high bridge in Snohomish County, nearly 60 miles south of where Tanya had been found, near a place called the Monroe Honor Farm. And this is where things take a dark turn. The killer did not use a gun on Jay. He used a completely different method, and the difference between the two deaths says something about this person that investigators would spend years trying to understand. Jay had been beaten with a rock. He had been strangled, with twine and 2 red dog collars wrapped around his neck. And then the killer did something else. Something that had no practical purpose. Something purely symbolic, purely cruel, purely intentional. He stuffed a pack of cigarettes down Jay Cook's throat. Not left beside the body. Not placed nearby. Stuffed down his throat. This was not evidence of chaos or panic. This was a message. From a man who wanted to leave a mark, his mark, on what he had done. Zip ties of the same type used on Tanya were found near Jay's body too. 2 people. 2 locations 60 miles apart. 2 completely different methods of killing. 1 zip tie. 1 killer. 1 calculated, cold, deliberate mind. The investigators now faced a case that stretched across 4 counties in Washington state. King County, where Jay and Tanya were likely taken after leaving the ferry. Skagit County, where Tanya was found. Whatcom County, where the van was found. Snohomish County, where Jay was found. The killer had moved across the entire region with purpose. Scattering evidence. scattering the bodies, creating jurisdictional chaos by design or by cold instinct. And what he left behind, besides the bodies, the zip ties, the van, was an unidentified fingerprint and DNA from semen found on Tanya's black pants. In 1987, DNA testing had only been used for the first time in a criminal investigation the year before. The technology existed, but it could only tell you that a DNA profile existed. It could not tell you who that profile belonged to if that person had never left any trace in any system. Forensic scientists developed a profile from the semen on Tanya's pants. They named it Individual A. The clearest, most direct biological evidence of the killer. A genetic fingerprint belonging to one specific person on Earth. A person with no name. The investigation began immediately and led almost nowhere. When Tanya's body was found raped, shot, hands bound, the first person investigators looked at was the obvious one. Jay Cook. The boyfriend. The only person known to have been with her. The person whose family's van was parked in Bellingham. The person whose body had not yet been found. Both families rejected this immediately and angrily. But police could not ignore what the evidence appeared to suggest before they had the full picture. Then Jay's body was found under the bridge. Also bound. Also brutally killed. Also with zip ties. And Individual A's DNA did not match Jay Cook. Both were victims. The killer was a third person entirely. Individual A's profile was compared against every available criminal database. No match. Because whoever this person was, they had never been arrested. Had never left any legal trace. The system had no record of them at all. In 2003, the Washington State Patrol uploaded Individual A's profile to CODIS, the FBI's national criminal DNA database, containing profiles from millions of people arrested across the United States. No match. Individual A was not in the system. Had never been in the system. And unless he committed another crime that landed him in a database, he could remain unknown forever, living his life while two families on Vancouver Island continued to wait. But that's not even the worst part. 1 month after the murders, the families of Jay Cook and Tanya van Cuylenborg began receiving anonymous letters. Threatening letters. Terrifying letters. Written by someone claiming to be the person who had killed Jay and Tanya. Mailed from different locations across the country. Year after year. Was it the real killer? Was it someone else, someone sick, someone exploiting a tragedy for reasons no one could explain? Police had to pursue it. Had to allocate resources, time, investigators, effort to a direction that ran alongside the main case for 23 years. 23 years. In 2010, thanks to a tip from viewers of the show Washington's Most Wanted, police finally traced the letters to their author. A Canadian man in his 70s with severe mental illness, who had heard about the case on the news in 1987 and started writing letters for reasons that existed only in his own mind. He had nothing to do with the murders. Nothing. 23 years of a parallel investigation. Gone. A dead end built on a sick man's obsession while the real killer drove his truck and went home to dinner. If this case is getting under your skin, you're not alone. Subscribe and never miss a story like this. And join our community through the link in the description, where we go deeper on the cases that refuse to let go. Over the years, more than 200 names crossed Detective Jim Scharf's desk. Two of the most prominent were Robert Yates and Gary Ridgway, serial killers active in the Pacific Northwest in that era, men who had killed women, men who could have been in the area. Both were thoroughly investigated. DNA results ruled both of them out completely. Not Yates. Not Ridgway. Each name eliminated added one more line to the list of dead ends. And Individual A remained nameless. Jim Scharf had joined the Snohomish County cold case team in 1995, and this case was one of the first files he opened. He looked at it and said, "This is probably the most terrible unsolved case we have." He was not family to Jay or Tanya. He had no personal obligation to carry this beyond any other case on his desk. But something about it stuck. He became the person most closely associated with this file for 23 years, re-interviewing witnesses, following every new development in DNA science, never truly closing it in his mind even when the daily work moved elsewhere. He understood one thing with absolute certainty: the killer had left DNA at the scene. DNA does not lie. DNA does not fade. DNA does not forget. The only thing missing was the right technology to speak its language. And he had to believe, that technology would come. Meanwhile, Jay's mother Leona Cook was still alive. Still waiting. Through holidays. Through birthdays. Through every year that Jay should have been living. Scharf thought about Leona Cook. Kept thinking about her. In 2017, 30 years after the ferry docked in Seattle and Jay and Tanya disappeared into the night, Scharf decided to try something that had not existed before. He reached out to Parabon Nanolabs, a forensic company in Virginia specializing in a technique called DNA phenotyping, using a person's genetic material to predict their physical appearance. Skin tone, hair color, eye color, facial bone structure. All derived entirely from the DNA itself. Parabon took individual A's profile and produced a computer-generated composite image of what the suspect likely looked like. For the first time in 30 years, Scharf had a face to look at instead of a code in a database. But the face was not what broke the case. What broke the case was who Parabon introduced Scharf to next. A woman named Cece Moore, America's leading forensic genetic genealogist, just appointed as head of Parabon's new genealogy division. And here is where the story takes a turn that no one in 1987 could have predicted. Not the investigators. Not the families. Not the killer. In 2015, a woman named Cheryl Rusted sat in front of her computer in Tumwater, Washington and did what millions of Americans were doing in those years. She bought a DNA test kit, collected a saliva sample, and uploaded the results to GeneMatch, a website where people voluntarily share their DNA to find relatives and build family trees. She had never heard the names Jay Cook or Tanya van Cuylenborg. She had no idea what individual A was. She just wanted to learn about her own roots. Ordinary curiosity. Nothing more. But Cheryl Rusted had a distant family connection she did not know about. A connection to a man who had boarded that same ferry route 30 years before her DNA test. And that connection was the thread that would finally unravel everything. When police later contacted her, Rusted said what no one wants to hear about their own family: "They told me they were investigating a member of my family for murder. A double murder." From 1987. In 2018, Scharf asked Cece Moore to perform genetic genealogy analysis on individual A's profile. Moore uploaded the DNA to GeneMatch and began searching through approximately 1 million profiles, 1 million ordinary people who had voluntarily shared their genetic information to find ancestors and relatives, none of whom knew they might be helping to identify a killer. Moore found 2 distant relatives of individual A in the database. People who shared enough DNA with the unknown suspect to be placed in the same family tree branch. From those 2 starting points, she began building the tree backward, finding common ancestors, then tracing every descendant branch forward, eliminating individuals one by one based on gender, age, and geography. Narrowing. Branch by branch. Name by name. Until only one remained. 2 hours. That was all Cece Moore needed to do what 31 years of traditional investigation could not. To move from 1 million DNA profiles to a single name. William Earl Talbot II. The source of individual A's DNA had to be the son of William and Patricia Talbot of Monroe, Washington. And this couple had only one son, William Earl Talbot II, who was 24 years old in 1987 and lived 11 kilometers from where Jay Cook's body had been found under the High Bridge. 11 kilometers. Scharf began reconstructing Talbot's life in 1987. And the pieces started falling into place with the terrible logic of something that was always true but had simply been waiting to be seen. In November 1987, Talbot worked as a delivery driver with routes throughout the Seattle area, right through the neighborhoods Jay and Tanya were heading to pick up heater parts from Gensco Heating. A few months before the murders, he had been fired. No fixed work schedule. No routes he had to follow. Free time. And a knowledge of those streets built from months of driving them every day. His former roommate, when located and questioned, added details that made Scharf's blood run cold. He had seen a blue blanket in Talbot's house and truck that year, similar to the blanket found placed over Jay Cook's body after he was killed. The roommate also described Talbot's personality as volatile and unpredictable when drinking, a completely different person from his sober self. A man who had once broken his own sister's arm in a rage. And then the most important detail. The roommate remembered that Talbot had once driven him out to the exact general area where Jay Cook's body was later found. Talbot knew that area. Was comfortable there. Had brought someone else there before the murders even happened. What happened next shocked everyone. But genetic genealogy, powerful as it was an investigative lead, not courtroom evidence. Scharf needed Talbot's actual DNA. Obtained legally. Without a warrant he didn't yet have grounds for. The solution was surveillance. Scharf and his team followed Talbot for several days as he worked his truck driving routes. Watching. Waiting. For the moment he discarded anything that had touched his mouth. Then, at a red light, Talbot's coffee cup fell out of his truck. Scharf's team collected it immediately. Rushed it to the Washington State Patrol lab the same day. And waited, with the tension of men who had waited 30 years and knew this was the final answer, for the results. Forensic scientist Lisa Collins compared the DNA from the coffee cup against individual A's profile. She cried when she read the results. Perfect match. The probability of finding another person on Earth with the same profile, 1 in 180 quadrillion. 180 quadrillion. That is 180 million trillion. Individual A had a name. And that name was William Earl Talbot too. We are about to get to the arrest, the trial, and the ruling that almost took everything away from these families. Subscribe now so you never miss a case like this, and join our community through the link in the description. May 18, 2018. 31 years, almost to the day, since Jay Cook and Tanya van Cuylenborg had boarded that ferry from Victoria and never come home. The Snohomish County Sheriff's Office announced that William Earl Talbot too had been arrested. Talbot was 55 years old. A middle-aged man working as a truck driver. A man who had lived his ordinary life in Monroe, Washington for 3 decades while 2 families in Canada waited for answers. A man whose name no one had connected to this case in 31 years. At the press conference, Jay's sister said what the family had been holding for 3 decades. It is hard to describe the feeling of relief, joy, and the deep sadness that this arrest brings. Jay's mother Leona Cook, the woman Jim Scharf had thought about throughout all those years, spoke too. And what she said was both a victory and a wound. On one hand, we are moving toward closure. On the other hand, we are still missing. I don't have my only son. Tanya's brother John van Cuylenborg, who had lived for 31 years with a void that had been called Individual A, could finally look at a real name. A real face. A real person who had to be held accountable. The trial opened in June 2019 in Everett, Washington. And from the very first days, it was clear that this was not just a trial about a 1987 double murder. It was a trial about the method that had identified the suspect. One of the first trials anywhere in the world in which forensic genetic genealogy was presented as evidence before a jury. And the defense attacked it directly. Could DNA from an unrelated third party, Cheryl Rustad, a woman who only wanted to build her family tree, be legally used to identify a murder suspect? Did using the DNA of innocent people as an investigative tool without their knowledge violate privacy rights? The court allowed the evidence. A precedent was set. One that would affect dozens of cold cases across America in the years that followed. Talbot's defense rested on a single claim. He and Tanya had consensual sex before she was killed. Someone else, a phantom the defense could not name, could not locate, could not produce a single piece of evidence for, had killed both Jay and Tanya. The prosecution took this apart piece by piece. Tanya was abroad for the first time with her boyfriend on a trip with a specific, practical purpose. She was on her period. There was no logic, no circumstance, no version of reality in which she would voluntarily have sex with a complete stranger that night. And more critically, both Jay and Tanya had been bound with the same type of zip ties. Both had been killed. Both had been found with the same ties near their bodies. This was not two separate crimes happening on the same night. This was one person. One decision. One night. The jury of 12 heard everything. The ferry. Individual A. The coffee cup at the red light. Cheryl Rustad and her family tree. Cece Moore in the 2 hours of analysis. The blue blanket. The volatile temper. The area Talbot knew. The cigarette stuffed down Jay Cook's throat. Then they went into deliberation. June 28, 2019. The jury returned. William Earl Talbot 2. Guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. 1 count for Jay Cook. 1 count for Tanya van Cuylenborg. William Earl Talbot 2, 56 years old at sentencing, would never walk free again. The case closed in the most absolute legal sense possible. The Jay Cook and Tanya van Cuylenborg case was not only a cold case solved. It was the moment when an entirely new method entered the world of criminal investigation and changed it forever. This was the first case in history solved using forensic genetic genealogy, using public DNA databases to identify a suspect not through the suspect themselves but through their relatives. People who had shared their DNA for completely innocent reasons and had no idea they were helping to build a net around a killer. After this case, the method spread across America and beyond. Thank you for staying with Jay and Tanya's story until the very end. If this case meant something to you, subscribe so you never miss one like it. Like this video so more people can find it. And join our community, the link is in the description box right below. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? See you in the next one.